All right, guys, welcome back to the show. I have a good friend of mine and just high-level holistic Czech practitioner and a myriad of other certifications. I forgot the name of them at the moment. Jator Pierre. Welcome back, Jator. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Thanks for having me back, man.
So last time we spoke, we talked about the psychology and the deep-rooted issues of why people gain weight or become overweight to begin with. And on today's episode, I actually wanted to cover the psychology behind why people remain overweight, even after the fact that they are consciously aware of the fact that they're making themselves overweight and they don't want to be overweight. So, objectively speaking, in my opinion, kind of losing body fat is extremely straightforward and there's not that much to it. But obviously, when you take self sabotage into consideration, the human psyche into consideration, all of a sudden, like a very simple task could become like extremely complicated to deal with. So,
Mhm.
no better person I know of, not even any PhD psychology majors here. I invite you back because I know you have great answers to a lot of those complicated issues. So,
Thank.
what's your take on that, Jator? Because I'm pretty sure over 20 years of being a holistic health practitioner, you run into like a myriad of these kind of
Mm.
problems. So, what's your take?
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think from a if we were to write down fat loss and how to do it on paper, I think it would be pretty cut and dry. It would be I think it would be almost so cut it would be very, very dry.
Like one page with like 20
Yeah,
fonts. Done.
yeah. I think we have a tendency out there in the world to, again, on paper, to make it more complex than it needs to be, and so if we get away from the objectivity of fat loss and get more into maybe the emotional perspectives or the mental perspectives, I think that it does become a much more complex picture. And in my experiences, there is a multitude of reasons why someone would come and say, I want to lose body fat. Interestingly, at the same time, another part of them shaking their head, no, I don't. And I think if we were to make the complex pretty simple, I think a very simple answer to that is uh, it's familiarity. Um, if you were to take a moment and imagine, if everyone that was listening to this could imagine that they were in a skyscraper, and this skyscraper, you were at the top of that skyscraper, and the 360-degree view was all glass. And you could go and look out the glass and you could look everywhere. And let's just say that you were in the city that you were raised in. So I was raised in Berkeley, Oakland, Albany area in California. So my skyscraper, I'm standing there, I'm looking out, and I can see, I know that street, I know that building, there's San Francisco, there's the Golden Gate Bridge, there's the Bay Bridge, there's my schools, yada, yada, yada. Okay, so that all demonstrates the familiarity of being where you know you're home. But fat loss or any other kind of body change is essentially like standing at the top of that skyscraper, looking out those windows and watching whole buildings disappear or watching streets disappear. Essentially, what I'm saying is, could you imagine the amount of fear you would feel if you were in your hometown and everything started to change in front of your eyes overnight? Most of us would feel a tremendous amount of fear. This is almost perfect timing. Think about how almost overnight COVID and quarantine had changed all of our lives. In those first moments, many of us felt a sense of overwhelming fear about what was going on. And part of that fear response is because everything has become all of a sudden unfamiliar. And when aspects of our lives become extremely unfamiliar, we tend to move into reactive behaviors or reactive behavior patterns, because our reactive behavior patterns are helpful to us feeling a sense of familiarity or control in environments that are very unfamiliar. Okay, so let's just take body fat then. If body fat and body fatness and having excess body fat and all of the intricacies of how we gain body fat is our familiar pattern, when things start to become unfamiliar, we will start to look for ways to create familiarity through our old behavior patterns. So our old behavior patterns will kind of come to the forefront and start to speak very loudly. It's very complex and very challenging for most human beings to hold the level of awareness and consciousness that that's happening and to not allow it. So someone might shake their head, yes, I want to lose body fat, and then become afraid of that same story and fall back into old familiar patterns to maintain their body fatness because they're afraid of change.
Do you feel at all like sometimes it's kind of like people have like a hard time transitioning to actually wanting to lose body fat simply because they live kind of like an unsustainable lifestyle, in the sense that it's not unsustainable to promote like mental and physical health? So for example, just a very typical one, let's say a person's like hardcore lawyer, they're working like 12-hour days, 10-hour days minimum on very complicated, stressful cases. And obviously, if they were to kind of create balance in their life, which will promote like fat loss or more of like a mindset that will facilitate, health conscious choices, they wouldn't be able to do that job anymore, or wouldn't be able to do that job to that degree. Do you feel like that's like a huge obstacle in and of itself? Because then they're kind of thinking like, oh man, now I'm going to lose like 80,000 a year in salary because I can't take on like 4 or 5 more clients, or can't do this many cases. I mean, et cetera, et cetera.
I love that. I love that. Another thread of this sweater that has thousands of threads. So keep throwing the threads out. Yeah. What I heard you say is that as a theme, human beings have a finite amount of energy each day, which I would say is true. And so I have to either consciously or unconsciously choose where my energy is diverted to. And so if majority of my energy is being diverted to workload, stress, and managing inflammatory processes in the body or ill health or parasite infection, etc., I'm not going to have the energy or the fortitude on board to continue forward with changing my lifestyle behaviors, because that's going to feel overwhelming. It's going to feel like another thing I need to do in my life that I don't have a lot of energy for. I'm sure you know these numbers much better than I do, but as a theme, Americans probably watch somewhere in the neighborhood of 4.7 hours of screen time, I think, now these days. And what does that show us? It shows us that many of us are so tired, the only thing that we can do when we get home is to zone out and disconnect, because we're outgassing so much energy on a daily basis towards jobs often that we don't really enjoy or don't want to do. And that doesn't leave us a whole lot of energy in the tank for other ways of being. As an example, in my own life, when I'm in creation process with creating a new online program or something, my workouts lessen purposefully because I'm diverting so much creative energy to doing something else that I need to honor where my energy goes so I don't burn myself out, and so that I can have my imagination and creative faculties on board for what I'm doing. So, fat loss, if we take away the idea of fat loss and just say the idea of change for most human beings is very challenging from an energy perspective, from an emotional familiarity perspective, from a perspective of that's not often talked about. When you start to change, whether that's losing body fat, gaining body fat, putting on muscle, losing muscle, whatever it is, we'll use body fat. When you start to change, often many people in your circle start to notice that change. And many of us would think that being noticed for positive change, and I'm going to do air quotes here, positive change, losing body fat, would be helpful. For many people, it actually is very scary then to start being acknowledged for the work that you're doing and the change that's occurring in your body. And interestingly, can start to sabotage their body fat loss due to feeling a sense of shame, of getting excess attention from people around them that they don't really want. I'll also use my dad as an example in this, which I think this is a fascinating story, which is something I went through. My dad's is a little bit more profound. When my dad went on his body fat loss journey, which has been a cycle that I think he's been doing since he was 17 years old. He's now 43, 63 and still cycling on that. Is my dad, interestingly, usually hits a point in his body fat story that he gets lean enough to the point that he doesn't recognize himself in the mirror anymore. And when he doesn't recognize himself in the mirror anymore, he actually gets afraid. I don't know who that is. And that is a very hard construct for many people to break, inclusive of the example that you were giving earlier around somebody who's overworking or working a ton or 12-hour days. The change of that construct to diverting energy to another place in your life is often very scary and very challenging. And it's a rare bird, as you know, that can maintain body fat loss for life. I think the return rate on body fat loss is somewhere in the neighborhood of 90%. It's not a very, it doesn't have good numbers in terms of long-term change and long-term effect, because these ideas are so deeply driven into us. And of course, then all of the other practical objective things, right? Food reward, palatability, calories in, calories out, overworking, under exercising, over exercising, under sleeping, oversleeping, gut microbiome, HPA access. All of these things play a role. And I think you and I would agree on this, is that if you take most people, the number one factor in terms of their body fat loss isn't so much macros. It really does boil down to calories in versus calories out. But that doesn't imply that the best way to go about this is simply cutting calories, because that piece is much more complex. And so it's a rare bird who faces change with courage, rather than faces change with fear and shame. And fear and shame is typically what drives us back into not wanting to change anymore, not wanting to be different, not wanting to stand out. Many people who are obese or have, in quotes, excess body fat also come from families that are in quotes, obese or excess body fat. And I'm not saying that's a gene issue. I'm saying that's an environmental issue or environmental challenge and a value challenge. And so if you come from a family whose values is about, let's say, over consuming or not moving, etc., these other environmental things that cause body fatness, and you've learned to fit into your family by being that, getting into shape or having a higher level of consciousness around health, if that's different than the family structure that you grew up with, that's going to be very challenging too. How many people do you know that go home at Christmas and their mom might say, "You're looking so skinny," or "You don't eat enough," etc. I mean, these are all things that influence us at a subconscious level to then start to look for more rewarding foods that lead to us getting our body fat back. I don't know if I even touched your question, but
Yeah, you answered it very well. So going back really quick to your comment on the very low success rate on lasting fat loss, although I would say you're a perfect example of a person that was overweight and then actually didn't return to it already for like, I don't know, 20 or 30 years. I don't know how long you've maintained it, but it's been a very
yeah.
long time. Do you feel like the biggest mistake people make is they return to the environment that gave rise to those problems to begin, or they just never leave that environment to begin with? So, they return back to sitting at a desk 10 hours a day, surrounded by people that aren't health conscious at all. So in their mind's eye, they might be like, okay, I'm like overweight, but everyone around me is like obese. So they're like, I'm healthy, I'm doing just fine. I'm on one pharmaceutical. All these guys are on 4 or 5 pharmaceuticals. So do you
I
feel
love
like,
that.
because I feel like even with health books, they're just basically like pretty much any health book on the market these days. I mean, probably 99.9% of them, they're just addressing issues that arise from basically living in like a very sedentary, civilized society that rewards kind of the mindset of like, basically, if you're not killing yourself for your work, you're not doing your work, and you're not like a valued member of society, et cetera, et cetera. So obviously, when you don't leave that environment, it's no surprise that you're going to have weight challenges your entire life. And you're going to lose 20, 30 pounds, gain 40 pounds. Lose 20, 30 pounds, gain 40 pounds. And you're always in a positive of like 10 pounds. You're actually getting every 2 years 10 pounds heavier than you've ever been,
Yeah, well said, brother. I would bet all the money in your bank account and mine that if anyone came and lived with us in our environment, and that was the environment that they were subjected to, they would lose body fat. So I mean, I don't know any other way to like make it more clear.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I mean, it would just be the environment is I'm confused often at how the environment isn't discussed. If you even look at fat loss studies, or you look at something, the environment of something like a Nutrisystem, let's call that an environment. People who get on Nutrisystem, who get their meals delivered to them, let's just say these are poisonous meals too, right? They're conventionally raised, they're full of garbage. Macros don't care. There's industrial seed oils, sugar, whatever, but it's confined, and it's very specific in terms of what you can eat, how often you can eat, and the environment is completely controlled, right? You eat those 3 boxes a day or whatever it is, and that's all you get. Every one of the people that go on in that environment lose body fat. But the environment is controlled. And most of those people, when they don't have then an outside force controlling, and they go back to their environment, which is they're in control of what they put in their mouth or surround themselves with, the body fat starts piling on. And so one of the easiest fat loss tricks I've personally experienced that seems underrated but is extremely environmental is anyone that wants to lose body fat long term, outside of this behavior change aspects, if you only want to do it from an environmental perspective, literally don't have any of the food that you are not in your allowables at home. It's that cut and dry. It is a extremely rare bird that is going to overeat meat, potatoes, and Whole Foods is a theme, and maintain body fatness as to where they're at currently. And so, yeah, I would 100% agree. The environment might play one of the biggest roles. And that just speaks to, again, I've had friends literally who I've lived with, friends and family members, lose body fat simply because I'm living in their house. And why is that? Well, in part, they're seeing a model of the behavior that a part of them wants to elicit. I want to lose body fat. I'm living with this lean, healthy person. Okay, I'm going to watch what they do. And interestingly, unconsciously, when we're surrounded by individuals, we often unconsciously take on others' behaviors. So they'll unconsciously start to elicit and engage in similar behaviors that they see me doing. But if they make that about me, if they make me responsible for that change and they don't take responsibility for that change process, when I leave, they're going to revert back to their old patterns.
Well, it's a perfect business model for you or any health practitioner.
I mean, it's a great business model.
Yeah.
I think that, being someone who's been through that, back to this environment, now living in Denmark, it fascinates me because I've gotten leaner here in Denmark. And of course, I don't have a car, right? So it's biking here. So that's a piece of it. I don't have my familiar treats and things that maybe I would get here and there. There's a lot of unfamiliarity. There's probably more movement, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. That's all true. But what I notice most is that when I go back to the States, especially when I go back home to the Bay Area, I have to be hyper aware of my environment because that environment has so many old cues to my brain that I'm unaware of. That in that environment back in the Bay Area, old patterns and old ways of being are so much easier for me to kind of slide down those slopes of than when I'm here in Denmark, where I've created a new way of being, which is very different. And so I think that, the environment has a tremendous amount of influence on our ability to sustain. And yeah, if you're on that repetitive cycle of fat loss, fat gain, one of the things you might try to do is, okay, how can I change the environment in which I'm in? And I guarantee, if I hung out with you every day and we were working out every day, I have muscle on my body, you have more muscle on your body. I would start to be like, I want to put more muscle on my body. And I would start to work out and engage in ways that you're doing to elicit that response, because there'd be some part of me unconsciously that would be comparing with Eugene. Mm-hmm. And so that would be in part a motivating factor for me. But that's just me changing environments. When I play ice hockey, that's a different environment. And there's always going to be aspects of us that compete and compare with the people around us. And often if those people around us are less healthy, it's easier for us to feel healthy, well, lean, etc., than if I put that person into a group with, like, let's just say me, you, Paul Check, JP Sears, etc. That person might say, oh, well, shit, I'm actually not that healthy. Now I need to either push myself in this direction, or I need to stay in that group where I feel like I'm the alpha.
Hey everyone, thanks for checking out this podcast. If sourcing high quality food is something you're interested in, but definitely find the subject matter confusing, check out my book on Amazon titled Anti-Factory Farm Shopping Guide. It's a very easy and non-technical read that's beautifully illustrated and comes with a comprehensive video series and other extended learning material. The book, in a very simplified way, breaks down the difference between caged, cage-free, free-range, and pasture-raised meats. It'll cover how to avoid GMOs, source high-quality water, fish, supplements, and many other related topics. Thanks again for checking out the podcast. And when you have a second, please check out Anti-Factory Farm Shopping Guide by Eugene Trufkin on Amazon.
Gotcha. Well, what do you feel about like kind of when it became acceptable? A lot of times I feel in the back of a lot of people's heads, like even when, like for instance, they become like very overweight or very unhealthy, they kind of justify it. They're like, well, at least like I have this like house, or at least I have this like respectable paycheck, but what do you feel? Because I feel like a lot of times people don't evaluate the cost of money. You know what I mean? What is it costing you to make like X amount of money, or what is it really costing you to have like that house? Like, when do you feel like it became so acceptable to kind of use that as like cognitive dissonance to basically ignore like the tremendous amount of pain a lot of people are in to get to that level?
Yeah, what a great question. I mean, my own personal experience has been that human beings innately all have a desire to matter and to be seen in one way or another, to be acknowledged, and especially to feel like they matter. And so all of us, inclusive of myself, will search out ways to matter, whether that's I matter because I make money, or I matter because I have a six-pack, or I matter because I have the coolest motorcycle on the block, or I matter because I'm the most beautiful, and on and on and on. I matter because I'm the ugliest. This is interesting. I matter because I'm the most obese. I matter because I'm the most fucked up. Human beings will always search out ways to matter. And the disrespect, in my eyes, of the vessel that we're in starts to take backseat when we become extremely celebrated about the levels that we can attain and the amount of mattering that we can get from an outside view based on status level. I mean, if you look at as a theme, let's just take Bill Gates as an example. Someone who has tremendous amount of money, tremendous amount of stature, tremendous amount of mattering, whether you agree with his ideas or not. Bill Gates matters, at least to Bill Gates. But look at Bill Gates's body. And so
it doesn't matter.
His body doesn't matter. And so I think in some regard, we all kind of choose what matters to us, right? To me, my body matters because, it's my vessel for being here. I like to be an athlete. I like to move. I like to play. I like to be athletic. It's very enjoyable for me to express that way. But we've each grown up in different environments, and we've each grown up with different values that have been instilled in us. So there's an example in my own house. The values that I grew up with was school first, sports second, girls third. That's what I got ingrained in me. And I was kind of defiant to the schools first when I was in high school. So sports and girls is what mattered to me. And then in college, it was still sports and girls. And then maybe now it's become sports and girls as well. Just
Well, at
kidding.
least it's consistent. You know? At least you knew your core values from day one, and you really stayed true to them. You know, that's admirable.
It's admirable. I stick to my guns.
Yeah.
No, but in all honesty, you know, what I became interested in was nutrition, movement, and gut health, and mental and emotional work, and that took precedence. But I don't think that we're going to, in quotes, fix what's happening in the world by, you know, saying what people are doing is the wrong way. I think a way that we could start to address it maybe is to start to bring models in that are healthy and well, emotionally, physically, mentally, that can model a behavior in these corporate environments, etc., that also aren't this kind of unattainable, at least for the non-genetically gifted, or the ones who want to do extreme amount of play with macros and working out. Someone that's relatable, rather than being, you know, extremely shredded. I'm not saying you shouldn't be extremely shredded. I'm just saying that bringing in people that are extremely ripped into environments where people are fat or obese or unhealthy can create more shame. For some people, it'll create motivation. For others, that might create a tremendous amount of shame and just have nothing to do with it. It's kind of like when we were kids and we'd be invited to play a sport, and maybe we weren't very good at that sport, and someone was really good at that sport. Many of us would be like, I don't really want to play today. I'll go play over here. But if we create environments in which we're allowing people to dip their toes in softly and slowly creating habit change over time with a person that I think is a little bit more relatable, I think that can be very helpful. And I'm not saying it's wrong to be super shredded. I'm not saying that at all. And I'm not excusing. I'm just saying that there's steps to all of these things. And maybe that would be a more helpful step, is to slowly go about this, rather than force feeding these things down people's throat, or to say, put the power back in their hands and say, you know, what is more important to you? What are the benefits and consequences of working your ass off at the cost of your body? Are you willing to deal with those consequences? And are you willing to enjoy those benefits? What are the benefits and consequences of focusing on your body at the cost of your work and your production, etc.? Are you willing to deal with those consequences? And are you willing to also navigate those benefits? So I think by helping to create a sense of autonomy around a lot of these subjects, I think we get a lot more buy-in to the change process over time.
Well, Jator, I think like you're talking about in terms of like the consequences of certain core values. I just feel like certain core values or certain ideals are also they create an environment that's intrusive on other people's core values and ideas. Simplified example there too. We'll go with the extreme example is, actually, let me just use this simple example. It's much better. The person that, you know, is willing to kind of sacrifice their core values and work themselves to death is obviously going to be hired at the expense of someone that wants more balance and actually enjoyment in their life and more of like a balanced family atmosphere. But now with that person wanting to take that job and being okay with working these 10, 12-hour days under a demanding schedule makes it so everyone has to do that now. Do you know what I mean? Because if you don't do it, you're not going to get the job and you're not going to make a living. So in a sense, this person's kind of forcing the wheel to start spinning, you know what I mean? And now no one can get off, and no one really likes that it's spinning that fast. But because this kind of one person created this cascade of events that basically forced everyone into this kind of environment. Now it's affecting everyone. So I feel it's like intrusive, you know what I mean? Certain core values, it's not like very isolated. It's not like, oh, you choose to do this and it's just contained in your lifestyle and doesn't affect me whatsoever, but everything has a ripple effect, you know? Like if you, I don't know, drop a rock in a pond or something, you know what I mean? I'm pretty sure like the water molecules will touch every single part of that pond eventually as it ripples through it. So what's your take on that? Because I feel that's like a huge problem, you know?
Yeah, I think if we were to look at that maybe from another angle, I think that a lot of this culture also stems from the top down. And the other thing that stems from the top down is that a lot of what's understood at a grassroots level, let's just say, at the level of the media, what stood as kind of accepted truths in culture right now around a lot of these topics, body fat being one of them, is typically 10 to 15 years behind what's current in research. And so when you start to dive into research around time off and rest and production and how well your employees produce and how that is to your bottom line, it's actually much better to have a well-rested employee who's healthy, working less, going home, has an outside life, and then showing up at work and doing it in a different way. So I think part of the issue is that it's old rhetoric that is staying around back to this original idea that we chatted about, which is it is hard for people to change. It's scary to change. And so if corporations or businesses and the leaders of those businesses are still bought into their ideas and their constructs, it's going to take a very rare bird who comes in with new ideas. And those are usually the people that we call innovators, right? Again, whether your politics are in agreement with Google or not, Google is innovative in the sense of, let's create a work environment that people want to be at, that they have fun being at, and they can play and take breaks and do all this stuff. So we actually milk a lot more of their creative juices. And so I don't.
Regarding Google, really quick, out of the dozen or so friends that I've had work there, it doesn't seem like any of them really liked working there at the end of the day. So I don't know how that environment really pans out, you know?
Yeah, I have one client from Google who loves it and says it's great. Okay. So, I mean, again, this is all individual for sure. Okay. And yet I would guess that time, there's high time expectation. I just, as a theme, I get the perspective of the ripple effect, and I agree. And for me, it's also important that as an individual, you ultimately have a responsibility to yourself and how you treat yourself. And if you're working in an environment that is celebrating overwork at the cost of your health and your wellness, my question to you is, how are you benefiting by working in that environment? It's very easy for us to kind of push that responsibility onto other people, and I get that there's an influence there. But ultimately, as an example, right, are you in that environment, Eugene?
No.
Am I in that environment? No. I chose not to be, though. And I've been in environments. I used to work for Club One where I worked, 60, 70 hours a week at some point. But it started to cost a toll on me, and I had to make a decision. Was the money worth my health? And for me, it wasn't. But for some people, it will be. And until those people are willing to take that responsibility and ask themselves a question, am I ready to change? It's rarely going to come from the top down, because there's too much benefit for companies to have people who are bought and sold into their own slavery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, regarding that, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know too much about this technology. So let me just say that off the bat. I've only read like one article and listened to one short podcast on it. I don't know if you're familiar with kind of the technology they're developing called like Neuralink. And basically, they're supposedly going to take like a small piece of your skull out, implant like a chip that has like micro wires that go into your brain to accelerate your productivity at work. So basically, I don't know what your take on that, because I kind of think like, okay, first of all, I'm not anti-technology at all. I use a tremendous amount of technology in my life, and I appreciate the creativity, especially that goes into creating a lot of technology. I just feel it's all about how it's applied. And usually, if you take the past as a reference point to how things are going to be in the future, whenever technology is up, workload is up. You know what I mean? So work actually becomes just more difficult for the individual, because now you have less people at work and the demand is much higher on each individual. And like we described, the bulk majority of individuals are already on the brink of exhaustion. So now let's take this technology that kind of increases neurotransmitter activity or some sort, which is, if that's on full blast all day, every day, I don't see how that could be like a good thing, even if you're able to regulate it somehow, because I feel just the human brain is such an enigma, even to the most competent people in that field, still even to this day. And I've kind of taken a few classes at University of California, Irvine, through leading cognitive science researchers. And even they told me, like, never do any psychiatric drugs. And those are the people on the leading edge of that stuff, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like, also think like another huge disadvantage of that is, once again, it'll create that ripple effect. You know, now companies are just going to hire you if you have this, because why would I hire you? This guy can do 5% more work for the same exact pay because he has this chip implanted into his head. Now it'll create that kind of environment that you see a lot in professional athletics, where just everyone has to use steroids if you want to be a professional athlete, because everyone's genetically gifted in that environment. And just because you're genetically gifted, that doesn't mean anything. You're just an average in that specific environment. So once again, going back to that ripple effect mentality, you know, because this one person was willing to do it, now everyone has to do it just to be able to get employment and not be homeless, basically, you know?
I mean, that's some Twilight Zone. I mean, I guess it's par for the course for 2020, right? I mean, in essence, man, I'm not against technology either. I agree with what you shared around technology. And I think what's often shocking to me, most shocking, is that something like this, putting a chip in your brain to increase production, it speaks very loudly to what many of us in the health and wellness field are also doing right now, which is all of these hacks to improve yourself. And
and every year the people usually doing those look like 10 years older. The only thing they hacked is they accelerated their aging most of the time. You know,
I agree, and I think what's fascinating to me about this continual pushing of ourselves with a disregard often to our physiology is we forget that we could just take someone like Einstein, right, who was brilliant and wasn't doing any of these things and was producing amazing theory and thought and perspective. And so, or we look at somebody, let's take a Paul Chek, who people are often like, how does he do what he does? And I've loved Paul's answer that I've heard in the past, which was, he said, I'm actually I'm just a normal functioning human being.
Yeah.
It's just what we're seeing now is that very few people are functioning at that normal high level, which is our innate ability because of the environments that we're in and because of how we choose to treat ourselves. And so these hacks or putting chips in our brain, when we haven't addressed yet our underlying physiology, our tissue health, our blood chemistry health, our hormonal health, our neurotransmitter health, our gut health, and on and on. That for me is literally asking for more trouble. And until we learn a very powerful lesson, which is you are enough as you are right now, I don't see that changing anytime soon. People have a very high propensity to self-criticize, self-shame, and self-fear. And that will always be a driver of, I need to improve and I will do anything to do it, even at the cost of my own life. So my take on that would be, sounds like a bad idea. But I'll watch the show.
Yeah. I'm always tuning in, you know? So I have the VIP seat for this freaking circus we call Earth.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, another thing I forgot is most likely another common thing that will go wrong with this kind of technology is like most people aren't going to be able to afford like the high-end version of those chips. So you'll get like generic knockoff versions, which inevitably will have more side effects. So that's going to create like enough, and most people are going to be using those most likely generic cheaper versions because it's going to be accessible to the masses. Obviously they'll probably be, and this is hypothetical, obviously I don't know this technology from start to finish, but just examining technology in the past and then presuming it's going to happen again in the future. They're going to be using those cheaper versions, going to have a lot more side effects, et cetera, you know? And then, yeah, so I don't know.
I mean, some of these topics, I honestly feel like we're talking about a movie. There's a part of me that, are we talking about real life right now? There's a show called Altered Carbon, which I really enjoy, and it's actually speaks a lot to this. And I'm kind of fascinated actually where we're going. And then there's also this other perspective that I have often, which is our parents' hated rock and roll as a theme. Our parents hated rap as a theme. And there's also like a part of this that is also probably me just showing my age. Who knows where this is going? And it could just be a part of me also opposed to the change process. It's an interesting perspective to consider.
Yeah, so personally, I'm not opposed to the change. I'm just opposed to technology being applied how it's been applied typically in the past, which I feel will happen exactly like that in the future. If it's applied more responsibly, and then you have like a fully functional human being that knows how to take care of themselves, maybe technology like this might actually aid that person to go to the next level. But if you're just making up deficits, like you mentioned, you're already like at a -50 and you're just using this to get you up to a -30, maybe start at a 0 first and then see how you're functioning and if you like that kind of performance and then go from there, you know, but at least get to a 0. Right now you're in the negative, man. So,
I agree.
So
start with the basics and see where you're at from there. And that's easy. That's easy for me to say because I've done it. And it's often, as a theme, many of us don't want to put in the work for change. It's easier to externalize that change onto something else, boosting us or helping us. It's very few people, as a theme, I think, that want to put in that deep work and time and effort. It's not easy to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think honestly, like on a side note, I think the fitness industry is a little bit to blame because they made it way more complicated than it should be.
I agree.
So the average person sees way more of an obstacle than there actually is, in my opinion. So from my
I
perspective.
I agree. Um, you could probably have one magazine on fitness, and we could be done with the whole conversation.
Yeah. Well, good luck getting these supplement companies to sell all their shit. Then
Yeah,
come on, Jator, you're not good for business, man. You got to change your mindset.
I can't. I don't know how these magazines just keep coming up with stuff. It fascinates me. I mean, human beings fascinate me. There's a continual search and a digestion of information that is honestly often just regurgitation of stuff from the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, do you have any closing statements, Jator? Do you have like any new online programs coming out?
Yeah, well, Restore will launch again July 3rd. Super excited about that. And then my other two programs, Explore and Elevate. Explore is running right now. We'll start again in July, and then Elevate will probably start again in September. So yeah, I'm excited about all of that, man.
And how do these programs work? Do people do they do it online with you, or is it like an in-person programs or?
So the programs are all online. They're interactive. They're also module based, so you get weekly modules released to you. But we do a lot of interaction and Q&A and coaching sessions live within our groups. And then get in contact with me. I now have one place, which is called explorewithjator.com. And there's a sign-up list for the next Restore there. Restore is essentially entry into all other programs. So I don't promote Explore, Elevate, and Illuminate, which are the next three, because the prerequisite to get into those is Restore.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Cool, man. I always like your stuff. Always have good information. So thanks again for being on the show, Jator.
Thanks for having me on, Eugene. Always a pleasure, man. Love your shirt.
Oh, thank you. Same one I wear all the time.
Hey everyone, thanks for checking out this podcast. If sourcing high quality food is something you're interested in, but definitely find the subject matter confusing, check out my book on Amazon titled Anti-Factory Farm Shopping Guide. It's a very easy and non-technical read that's beautifully illustrated and comes with a comprehensive video series and other extended learning material. The book, in a very simplified way, breaks down the difference between caged, cage-free, free-range, and pasture-raised meats. It'll cover how to avoid GMOs, source high-quality water, fish, supplements, and many other related topics. Thanks again for checking out the podcast, and when you have a second, please check out Anti-Factory Farm Shopping Guide by Evgeny Trufkin on Amazon.